I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is James Corbett. He's the publisher of the CorbettReport.com. He's also editorial writer for the International Forecaster. Welcome back to the show, James.
Thank you for having me on. Always a pleasure to be here.
And you always report to us live from Japan. Where?
I'm in the west of Japan. I'm in a little city that's between Hiroshima and Osaka on the west side of the main island.
And the climate there?
This is known as the sunniest part of Japan, so it is usually unrelentingly sunny, and this summer has proven no exception. We had something like 6 or 7 weeks of straight, every single day, uninterrupted sun, and it was unbearable. But hey, it's finally broken, and we've gotten a little bit of rain lately.
And you're also the peach capital of Japan?
That is correct, yes. You've done your homework, yeah. Delicious peaches.
Well, anyway, any peaches hanging out in the Asian economy right now that we'd like to pick?
If only. No, the news has not been very promising on any major level. We saw a sell-off in Asian stocks earlier this week, and we've seen a rebound, but the question is what's really happening. And basically, all the talking heads are pointing the blame at jitters and concerns over the Fed and whether or not it's going to raise rates this year. The consensus being that it's likely to happen in the December meeting. Probably not until then, but at any rate, in December, it's looking like the Federal Reserve may try to raise rates again. And that's bad news for a lot of Asian economies, especially emerging economies in Southeast Asia, where we've seen a lot of money coming out of the U.S. over the last several years, really, of this central bank-created bubble into emerging markets where investors at least see the promise of high single digits, sometimes even double-digit returns, as opposed to the anemic return environment that they're getting from stocks or bonds in the U.S. itself. So, obviously, in the event of a rate rise, we'd see that money flooding back into the U.S., coming out of those emerging markets, which would cause instability. Now, this is one of the reasons that the Fed has been waffling over whether it's going to raise rates or not. One of the considerations is the effects on the global economy, and that just can't be dismissed at this point. The global economy is interconnected because of the funny money liquidity that is propping up markets around the world now that's sourcing from the Fed. So that's one of the things that we have to keep in mind. And honestly, I don't think that the Fed can raise rates this year without causing precipitous problems. But that doesn't mean that they're not going to try to do it.
Are people really waiting that long to see what happens across the world? And of course, the Fed keeps saying we have to see the right signals, and people are waiting for their signals. Don't you get negative feedback?
Yes, I mean, it is basically a game that's being played at the moment between the Fed and investors, and I guess the general public have a part to play in that as well, in that obviously it's based on perception more so than anything else. The Fed says that they're looking at a number of factors, but it doesn't seem to ever matter the specifics of unemployment figures or those types of numbers don't seem to be the numbers that are the deciding factor. It's always it's a basket of concerns, and they'll highlight one or another concern as the needs to take place in order to basically justify whatever their position is at the moment. So I think it's basically about central bankers ultimately just having the final say over what's going to happen or not, and then the rest of the public and the investors certainly are trying to second guess what the central bank is going to say, so that we have reached a point where the markets are really nothing about the fundamental underlying of the economy now. Now it's basically what do you imagine is in the mind of, Yellen and the other members of the FOMC, or, here in Japan, Kuroda and the Bank of Japan, or the central bankers are the ones in control at this point. And it doesn't really have to do with the fundamental underlying of the economy. And I think that can only be maintained until there's a breaking point. And it's really a question of what that breaking point is and where it is achieved first. And of course, it always could be Japan, which sees that breaking point first, because we, of course, still are living in the negative interest rate environment over here. The Bank of Japan talking about maybe cutting further into interest rate territory to try to achieve its 2% inflation target. But that, of course, is coming up against the back of this stimulus that they've just announced that the government can't really afford in the first place, and it's just going to go further into debt for. So, I mean, Japan is on a breaking point on a lot of different levels. And again, given the interconnectedness of the global economy, what happens in Japan will spread out to other markets very quickly.
Japan, despite its negative economic numbers, still is one of the world's biggest economies, isn't it?
It is. It's still the third largest economy, and there are differences in how you measure what largest means. But at any rate, it is behind the U.S. and China at this point, and is still a fairly large economic player. And its financial markets are still developed enough and have enough depth that they are important. And that's why we see, for example, the largest bank in the world is the Japanese Post, which is acts as a banking system, which is now in the process of being privatized. It's formerly government held. It's being privatized at the moment. It's why we see some of the largest investors in the world, including the largest public investment fund, is the Japanese public pension fund. So there's some significant amount of investment and capital here that really does dictate markets to a large extent, and combine that with the U.S. dollar Japanese yen exchange rate is closely monitored and closely tracks what's happening in the stock markets, because the Japanese yen has traditionally been used as a carry currency for people who to basically move out of the U.S. dollar and hold Japanese yen, because Japanese interest rates are generally get you a better, a more safe return. So that's the way it's been for a very long time, and that's why Japan is still held to as an important player in the global markets, and that's why Bank of Japan coming out just this week and floating the idea that they may cut further into interest rate territory, negative interest rate territory, is significant. It shows that really, I mean, if the Fed raises rates, they are raising against the tide, not with it.
And if Japan does that, will more people again take cash out of the bank and hide it, as you said, in their closets?
It is absolutely the most likely occurrence of what's going to happen here, is that a very traditionally conservative populace in terms of what they do with their money are going to continue to be conservative. And if they are going to take a hit in their commercial savings accounts, then they will take money out. Now, so far, the negative interest rates haven't affected the consumers at that level. They're still really, I mean, they have to do with banks and bank reserves. But depending how much they cut into negative interest rate territory, that could hit commercial savers in their savings accounts, who are already getting next to nothing in terms of interest on their savings deposits.
Well, the Japanese have always been amongst the world's best savers. Where are they now?
They continue to be, but right now, of course, we're starting to run into that demographic wall. We're starting to see the generation that grew up in the boom and even the bubble of the 80s are now starting to retire. And it's, of course, increasingly an aging population, one of the oldest populations on the planet, and only getting older. And as they start to retire and start drawing on those savings rather than accumulating more savings, that's when we start to run into all sorts of problems, especially because the Japanese public has traditionally held their savings in Japanese bonds, government bonds. So when you have lots of people retiring, not so many young children coming up to take their place, you're going to see a significant strain put on that debt financing that Japan has had baked into its cake for a very long time here. Of course, the Japanese government has the highest debt to GDP ratio in the developed world, but they have always been able to support that because a lot of the debt has been internal, held by the Japanese public itself. But as that starts to change, and as even the large investment funds, the pension funds, start shifting away from Japanese government bonds and into the stock market, exactly as the Bank of Japan and the Abe government has been trying to goad them to do, as that happens, that puts even more strain on the government to be able to issue bonds at all. So there is, as I say, there's a demographic wall that's being reached that there is no clear and easy solution to, especially in a society like Japan that has been so insulated for so long and very much against the idea of bringing in foreign labor into the country. Something's got to give at some point.
When you say they don't want to bring in foreign labor, in other words, they're not going to host 100,000 refugees anytime soon?
Certainly not. Japan is happy to take its part on the international stage in terms of donations or sending aid or even participating with its self-defense force, quote unquote, in supporting various wars and things of that, and then supporting the refugees. But they certainly aren't opening their doors to refugees, and the recent migration that we've seen going on is no exception. But beyond that, Japan is still a notoriously difficult country to move into for work purposes, and that again is there's some pressure. The idea, at least, is increasingly common that perhaps that needs to change, but there isn't a lot of political will to make that happen.
We'll have more with James Corbett right after the break.
GEM International is a new diamond explorer in the richest diamond producing country in Africa, located next to the fourth largest producing diamond mine in the world. International Spotlight is on an 1109 carat diamond recently discovered in Africa by a fellow Canadian junior with a proven operator and finance team. GEM International trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol GI. Visit us at gemdiamondmining.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with James Corbett. James, the weather in Asia, in your part of the world, has been horrible. Super typhoons, other major storms ripping through the area. What kind of an impact does that have on the economy and trade? Or are you just used to it?
I think it is. I mean, it's not exactly unpredictable in the sense that this never happens. I mean, there's always typhoons and storms and flooding going on. Of course, you can never predict exactly when or where that's going to strike, and it can affect different industries and sectors in different ways depending on when and where it strikes. But I would say generally this type of thing is factored into the economic cycle here, and a lot of the key manufacturing tends to take place in parts of the country where they are not so usually affected by these types of storms and floods. The obvious exception, of course, being in the wake of the Fukushima disaster, which, of course, took place in a heavily part of the country that relies heavily on manufacturing. So when that tsunami hit, that really did affect the Japanese economy for quite a while, and still has some ramifications. But no, generally these types of things, although of course they're never good, but they're generally factored into the usual typhoon season.
How interested are people there in the U.S. election now?
It's obviously important to the world, and I mean, again, as Canadians know, what happens in the U.S. and with the U.S. presidential election does have ramifications everywhere. So there is interest. I don't think that the understanding of the average Japanese person extends beyond the little sound bites and, you know, the sort of prepackaged idea of these candidates that they get in the evening news. And you can go on YouTube and see there's a number of channels that will do kind of man-on-the-street interviews with the average Japanese person, asking them, what do you think about Trump? What do you think about Clinton? And you'll get the sort of the general mainstream news kind of opinions being reflected back at you. So I'm not sure that the understanding of this election cycle is really that much more than any other one, but it certainly is an important one. And I think people at least understand that this is pretty important and will potentially have a great effect on the Japanese-U.S. military relationship. At least that's the idea that Donald Trump has been talking about, making changes to that relationship.
Of course, Japan really does want to get foreign troops off their soil, don't they?
There is a large and very vocal protest movement here, especially, of course, in Okinawa, which has been the home of American military bases, since World War II, and there are constant tensions. Those tensions ramped up earlier this year with the death of a young girl at the hands of someone connected to the U.S. base. It wasn't an active service member, but it was someone connected to the U.S. Base, and that has only inflamed tensions and further put political pressure on the governor of Okinawa to try to renegotiate. They've been talking about moving the U.S. bases in Okinawa to less populated areas for a very long time now, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of movement on that. So, I mean, barring maybe a Trump presidency and that changing fundamentally the status of the U.S.-Japanese relationship, I'm not convinced that's going to change anytime soon. But there are certainly a lot of people here who do resent that military presence.
Are people for or against a particular candidate in the U.S.?
Generally speaking, I would imagine that most people would probably be more familiar with Hillary Clinton and probably more comfortable with that because of the way that Trump is often portrayed. But that that certainly doesn't filter down to everyone. And there's also the added layer of difficulty in assessing that, where the answer that you're likely to get from people when you're talking to them in conversation here or when you're doing a man on the street interview is likely going to be different than the answer that they really believe when they're, at home with their family. So there's definitely a difference. They even have names for that in Japanese, tatemae and honmae, the face that you show to the world versus your true self. So that makes polling and things of that sort a little bit more difficult in a country like this. So I don't really know what the underlying sense is, but I think that the polite, acceptable opinion would probably be in Hillary Clinton's favor.
I know the Japanese love technology. They rely on technology for so many things. Do they still believe technology will save their economy?
Well, there's always that kind of techno-utopianism that underlies what is happening here. And there is still that sense of wonder, and people like shiny gadgets, and, certainly robotics is making leaps and strides here, and is at least used as a showpiece by various companies that are working, Honda and others that are working on their own robot kind of things. More as, obviously not as it's so much a commercial venture yet, more so as a type of flagship development for these corporations that will show to the public that they're working on the innovation. I don't know if people really believe this is going to be the savior of the Japanese economy, and I don't think that they should, given the state of the Japanese industry and economy here. It has been decades since we've seen really innovative products coming out of major Japanese corporations. It's been a long time since, Sony's Walkman or whatever changed the way people were consuming music. And you'll note that in the last couple of decades, certainly it's been more corporations like Apple that have been known for their innovation and changing the status of markets, or in Samsung or, Korean companies. It's been a long time since Japan has really been making headlines in that way. And that doesn't look fit to change anytime in the foreseeable future. There isn't really a lot of work that's going on here that seems innovative or fresh in that way. Again, it's Japanese corporations predictably playing it safe. And so I don't think that there's a great deal of enthusiasm in the public for the idea that technology is going to change things. And I think there should, to the extent that enthusiasm exists, it should probably be even a little bit less.
And yet the Japanese really love to educate their kids. They have special classes on the weekend. They put in several hours. Why isn't that working out?
Well, it's a question of the economic environment more so. No one disputes that East Asian culture generally very much prizes education, and of course the standard trope is, of course, Chinese and Japanese parents are always pushing their children to be doctors and engineers and high earning jobs, and that's why they do generally tend to succeed so well, for example, in Canada and the United States. But the flip side of that is it's a factor of the economic environment that you're placed in. And there was a time when Japan hit that perfect sweet spot, that they had the development and the industrial infrastructure to be a manufacturing workhorse, and they had innovative technologies. That doesn't exist at the moment. It's now more so in places like Korea and others that are still playing catch up to a certain extent, I guess, economically speaking, but are more situated to be manufacturing / technologically innovative base. So it doesn't really matter how great your PhD is or whatever it is, if you don't have the business environment in which to really launch yourself.
James, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thank you very much for having me on.
My guest has been James Corbett, publisher of the Corbett Report and editorial writer for the International Forecaster. He was speaking to us from Japan. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Questions can be sent to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.